I recently made a box for a nixie thermometer project I've been working on for quite some time, and I got some laser cut acrylic or perspex or plexiglass, and I had to glue it together. So this video is about how to glue perspex. I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, but perhaps some of the tips I'm sharing will be of use to you. So the first thing you're going to need is some perspex glue. This is dichloromethane. It's really quite thin and viscous, a little bit like water. And some masking tape to hold your pieces together. Some gloves to stop getting fingerprints on the perspex. And of course your laser cut parts. So you want to begin by peeling the paper backing from your perspex. If you take it slowly, this will come off pretty well. And I only take it off one side. That just makes it a little bit easier to handle the perspex without getting fingerprints on it. So I do that for the other pieces as well. And the next thing to do is to somehow get your pieces to stay together. This can be quite fiddly. I've used masking tape because it doesn't seem to leave too much glue residue on the perspex, which could be difficult to get off after the fact. But also I'm putting the masking tape predominantly onto the sides, the outer sides that have the unpeeled backing, so the sides that still have the paper protective layer on them. So even if a bit of glue residue happens to stay on the paper coming off the masking tape, that's no great problem because we'll peel that paper off later once our design is all nicely glued together. So that's two sides nicely held together, reasonably closely aligned. And I'll begin with the third side. This particular enclosure has 5 bits of perspex or acrylic in total. Spending some time to align all the bits of acrylic is important. Time spent at this stage before you apply any of the perspex glue is time well spent, because it's easy to move stuff around at this point, not so easy once you start splashing glue around. So I now put the fourth side into place, and this is where I start to don the white gloves. These are just cotton gloves from the hardware store, perfect for keeping fingerprints off things like perspex, and really useful later on down the track to clean these enclosures too, so if they become dusty or need a bit of a wash with soapy water, you can put these gloves on, and it just again means that as you're cleaning, you're not applying fresh fingerprints. I use a bit of masking tape here just to create a kind of brace that keeps the two longer sides together while I position the two shorter sides. This is really quite a fiddly activity, but you can generally just massage the bits slowly into place, and because they are cut with such precision by the laser cutter, it means that you'll know that your parts will at least come together pretty precisely. But it is a little bit harrowing, and it does take a bit of patience to get all these bits nicely aligned such that you don't have any gaps or wonky parts. Again, a few minutes spent in preparation like this can save a bit of heartache later when you come to apply the Perspex glue. And plenty of masking tape to keep things well and truly in place while the glue is setting. So I'm just moving around the enclosure a little and pushing the pieces down just to make sure that the alignment is nice and precise. The other thing you'll note is I've put butcher's paper down on my work surface just to try and keep it clean, keep it dust free, stop any dust getting into the liquid glue, and stop the acrylic from getting too dusty in the process as well. A little bit more work on making sure that things are aligned. This is kind of an iterative process. The tweaks you need to do should get smaller and smaller and more gentle as you proceed. Okay, time for the gluing. So this is dichloromethane, very liquidy glue. And I just put it on with a paintbrush, and if you put it into a gap between two joints of acrylic, what happens is that the capillary action causes that very liquidy dichloromethane to get sucked into the gap, and it essentially performs a weld. So the dichloromethane is more of a solvent than a glue, and it welds the two bits of acrylic together. So what you're left with is a very clean joint between the two bits of acrylic that have effectively become one through this welding action. Here's a bit of a better view that shows a bit more what's going on. So I'm just getting in there with my paintbrush. I have very little dichloromethane on the brush. You'll see that as I dip in, I'm very careful to wipe any excess dichloromethane off the brush. And that's just to ensure that I don't splash it around. Because it is a solvent, it will dissolve the acrylic. If you do get splashes on the acrylic, the advice I've read is to just leave it, and the solvent will eventually evaporate, and hopefully there won't be too much damage done to your acrylic. So you've just got to make sure that you work through methodically and do all the joints. I always work on the interior side of the box because it's much easier to get right into the corners there between the joints, and the capillary action ensures that enough of the solvent is sucked in to the gaps. And once you're happy with your box and that you've applied the Perspex glue to all joints, It's now time to leave it for several hours at least until that weld has attained its strength, and then you can start to peel off the masking tape and the protective backing